Good morning. Hey guys, I'm glad you're here this morning. I realized something this week, actually this morning, as I was continuing editing my 3-hour sermon, that I think it's preachers' jobs to take simple ideas and make them very complicated in the hopes that you can understand the simplicity of the gospel. And today's kind of like that. If you will, I will. I think that's backwards. That's my fault. Forget the title this morning. It doesn't apply. As of Wednesday morning, it applied. It's really not applicable as of today. It is a little bit, but this is the complicated side of the simple message of the gospel. John 14, verse 15 through we'll stop at verse 24. Now, Jesus is giving his farewell speech, farewell conversation to the disciples. Shortly after what he says here, he ends up on a cross, as most of you know. In fact, he's on a cross for your sake because he loved you, because his Father loves you. And he comes off that cross. He rises from the dead, and through the power of the Spirit, you don't just know him. You live with him and with his Father. In fact, you become his home. John 14, 15 said Jesus he's talking to his disciples, poured out his heart. He says, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever. Even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Yet a little while, and the world will see me no more, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. In that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. Whoever has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father. And I will love him and manifest myself to him." Judas, not Iscariot, said to him, "Lord, how is it that you will manifest yourself to us and not to the world?" Jesus answered him, "If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words, and the word that you hear is not mine, but the Father who sent me." And Father, that's my prayer this morning, is that the words that we hear are not my words, but the words of you as you send me here to this church, to this family, to preach the truth. May it be ever so clear that loving you is loving each other. And it's all rooted in the love you have for us. So when I read that, John 14, 15 through 24, what is this is my notes today. I just took a picture of my whiteboard. I promise I can't read it. What do you feel? How do you feel when you hear those words? I mean, what's your mind processing? What are the emotions that run through you? I mean, 4 times it says in there, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Those who keep my commandments love me. Those who do not love me do not keep my commandments." Seems to be like interwoven through this section of the talk that Jesus has with his disciples. How does it make you feel? You know, just to yourself, just be absolutely honest with yourself, because this can help dictate how you find the truth here, okay? I've got 3 possible emotions, thoughts, interpretations you may have when you read this. The first one is this. There's about 18 action verbs as associated with Jesus and God and the work he will do with us in this section. Now, give or take 18. I just quickly counted them as I read it. And about 11 associated with you. And those 18 with God, most of them are future. which tells me there's a lot of promises buried in this section for you, if you love him. And so it's possible that you feel that if you don't love God, these promises will not come, or that the promises of God are hinged upon you loving him. Well, it's partially correct, partially true, but can be massively misapplied, because if what's associated with that interpretation to you is fear and anxiety, that if you don't, then you won't receive these promises. Well, Jesus tells his disciples just moments later, let not your heart be troubled. My peace I leave with you. This statement that he tells them is not a statement that should generate fear or anxiety. In fact, you can't self-initiate love for God. So there's that possibility. If I don't love God, I will not receive the Spirit. He will not make his home with me. He will not love me. The Father will not love me. He will not manifest himself. These are all the promises found right here. If I don't love God, that's a lot to carry. Second possible interpretation is, we start off verse 15. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. So it's possible to interpret this that loving God is obeying his commandments. Therefore, if you don't obey his commandments, you do not love. That love equals obedience. Well, once again, it's partially correct. But once again, the misapplication of love beginning with you. That love is you working out your obedience in God. And if you fail, you don't love God. If you fail at obeying God and his commandments, maybe you stole something, maybe you lied, then you don't love God. And once again, it's partly true, but if you misapply it, then it's completely false. And I'll explain this in more detail. If you read this, though, and you get this interpretation, I think you're heading in the right direction. That there is a unique, special relationship between you and God, and it's revealed in your love for him and his love for you. That God pours out his blessings on you when you know him. That this passage is about Jesus leaving these disciples and their relationship continuing. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Those two are inseparable. You cannot love God and not keep his commandments. That is impossible. And I'm gonna show you here, in fact, a lot of it in the Old Testament, how you cannot separate these two. It's not possible. And because if you're thinking in the terms of commandments as in the things you do in life, then you may be able to split these two things. That loving God and I could be naughty. Loving God and keeping his commandments are inseparable. But we need to understand what is love, what is keeping, what are his commandments, and we'll get to it. But let me start by asking you this. If you struggle with loving people, loving them for who they are, just caring about people, I have a hunch that you struggle with your relationship with God. If you struggle with caring and loving people as God has loved you, people annoy you, there's bitterness in your heart, you just can't reach out to them, you push away, you isolate, I believe that's a reflection on the struggles you're having with your relationship with God. Love, as the world, we're going to talk about love for a while. Love, as the system of the world sets it up, is reciprocal. That means this, that when you are born into this world, the world has the ability to love only based upon the love it receives. That I would love you, I would instill value into you if I receive value back. Let's just take a typical family that just doesn't know the Lord, that a child is born, and that child is valuable in the sight of parents. And those parents value that child, and they love that child because of the value they have in that child. And that child is raised up in the love based upon the value it receives from its parents, and in return, values and loves the parents back. But if you take a dad who places a career and values a career over the child, the value it steals in the child is different. And the love the child and the value the child gives back would be equivalent to that which the dad gave. In fact, I heard a story this week about a dad who taught this principle to his kids. And it turned out many, many, many years later that the dad was living a lie. Just a flat out lie. In fact, the dad valued something very secretive in his life that came out when this child became 35, 40. And when the child heard it, and recognized that it had no value in the eyes of his father, he stopped talking. He stopped calling. And he pulled his love back. Because this is how the world operates. It will love if loved. It will value if valued. It will reciprocate love if loved. So if you struggle with loving people, it's possible that you're stuck in between two worlds, or we would call your old self and your new self. That you are loving based upon the value you're receiving from people. And let's be real. A lot of people are annoying. Especially at work, especially in the family, and they're hard to love. Absolutely hard to love. And you struggle. You want to love them because you read the Gospels and you know you ought to love them, but there's nothing there to love them back. And you're caught between these two people within you, these two worlds of wanting to love, knowing you ought to love, but you can't muster it up inside of you because you have been void, or love itself has been exacted from you and you have nothing else to give. But God's way of loving is not the world's way of loving. And if we bring this into John 14, and if you consider the idea, if you love me, you will keep my commandments, we cannot forget Romans 5 and 1 John 4. Romans 5:8 says, you see, look, guys, I'm just going to be honest with you. I was ready to go this morning until I asked a question. This question, does the Old Testament ever command us to love one another? And this morning, and I looked through that real quick, and I came across something that altered, that's why the title has to go this morning, that altered the message and showed me something much more richer in this conversation Jesus had with his disciples, which is rooted in Deuteronomy. And we'll get there. So things are not in order right now, and I'm trying to put them in order as I go, and it's just not working. So now that you know that there's all chaos up here, that doesn't help you at all. Romans 5:8. But God shows his love for us that while we were still sinners, but sometimes me just acknowledging that I'm still swirling up here, it helps me out. But God shows his love for us while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So what is this word sinner? It's to miss the mark. Your love falls short of God. It doesn't even make it to him. And God says, hey, I'm going to love you even though your love doesn't make it to me. Even though your love is misguided. You missed the target. While you are attempting to love me by loving yourself or loving the world, while you are sinning, I'm going to love you. You see, the value that God puts in you is not based upon what you give him. It's based upon who he is. It's based upon his nature, his very being. God's way of loving is not the world's way of loving. It originates from within him because God is love. 1 John 4, verse, I want to say 10. Yes, I was right. 1 John 4:10. In this is love. Not that we have loved God, but that he has loved us and sent his son to be a propitiation for our sins. Now, kids, that's a big word. Propitiation is a big word for saying he received your punishment. Verse 19. We love because he first loved us. So you keep this in view in John 14. If you love, you will keep my commandments. Well, so your love is not self-initiated. It's not self-generated. It comes from somewhere else. And it comes from God himself. God is love. And now you are loving off of a new paradigm. You are loving off of a new system. And that not because people value you do you love them, but because of what you're becoming within. You're becoming love yourself. And that you love because God is in you. And that you love others because God is working through you. And so your love for others is no longer rooted in anything they do for you, they give you, or even their love for you, but it's rooted in the love you have received from God. And so if you struggle with loving others, the answer is not to go and work on your love for others. It is to go back to the source of love, God himself, who values you even when you brought no value to him. You see, it's backwards in the world's mind. We can now love not because we've been loved by the world, but because there's someone, God himself, who loved us because of who he is. He had pity, compassion for a sinful man like myself and like you, who did not give him any value, but found value in me. And I get to love you in return in the same manner. And so if you struggle with loving others, this is why I say I believe you struggle in your relationship with God and with receiving love from God and knowing God is love and knowing that you are loved, because that is a symptom. The inability to love others is a symptom of something much deeper. Love not penetrating your heart. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Now the word love is agapeo in Greek. It's a present verb. In verse this is, let me go to my whiteboard real quick. Verse 15 and verse 23. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. That's Romans. And then verse 23 says it in the same manner. Chapter 14 of John. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And notice the verb forms. If you love me, present verb, you will, future verb, keep my commandments. And so if you interpret this as that keeping the commandments is loving God, is wrong. Love always precedes keeping the commandments. What commandments are we talking about? Now see, my original path here was to look at the commandments found in John. And I'm going to still pull out the main one, but I'm not going to use this as the thrust. Because I want to see John's commandments, the Gospel of John, and what does Jesus command us to do? And the biggest command in the Gospel of John is to believe. About 98 times, believe in the Father. There's about 4 commands that have to do with behavioral stuff. The overarching theme in John, the command in John that prevails is to have faith in God. If you love me, you will have faith in me. I mean, that makes sense. But I don't want to settle there, because there's something else that keeps coming up here. Let me read this to you again, John 14:15 through 24, and just point out something here as I go. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever. So if you love God, you've got a helper, the Spirit of truth. So God now in you, the Spirit of God in you, whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him. You know him. You know the Holy Spirit, because he dwells with you and will be in you. He goes, I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. I will come to you. Yet a little while, and the world will see me no more, but you will see me. Okay, so we're going to feel like we're going off course now, just talking about something totally unrelated to loving God, keeping his commandments. You got to follow Jesus. Every word he's saying here, he's revealing something about you and about loving. Yet a little while, and the world will see me no more. The world will see me no more, but you will see me. And he's not just talking about the disciples. You today, church, will see Jesus and have seen him. Listen, and he explains himself, because I live, you also will live. That means your life is rooted in the life of Christ. In that day, you will know that Jesus, is in my Father, you in me, and I in you. So Jesus is saying, you're one with the Father, you're one with him. Look at each other, you see Jesus. Whoever has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. Now he switches this phrase around. If you have my commandments and keep them, it is he who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him. I think this is a very critical phrase. I mean, it seems like he pulls it out of thin air. What? He's just talking about manifesting himself to these people who are loved by the Father, these people who love him and keep his commandments. And Judas, he asked a question, not as scary. He said to him, Lord, how is it that you will manifest yourself to us and not to the world? So Judas has asked this question. How are you going to make yourself known to us, and that someone of the world may be standing right next to me and not see you? How is this going to be possible? How is it that we're going to see you and the people of the world are not going to see you? Listen to his answer. At first, I read this 20 times, and it just seemed like Jesus was dodging Judas's question, and it finally made sense. He answers his question very clearly. Jesus answered him, if anyone loves me, what's the question? How will you manifest yourself to us and not the world? If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and he will come to him and make our home with him. And then he talks about the world. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words. And he said earlier already, the world cannot know him because it cannot receive him because it does not know him or see him. Judas asked me, just paraphrase the question, how are you going to manifest yourself to us and not to the world? If you love me and you keep, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him. We will come to him and make our home with him. That word home, by the way, one other place in the New Testament. Chapter 14, verse 2. In my Father's house are many homes. And if you're here a few weeks ago, it now makes sense. You are the home. You are the rooms. And there are many, many, many homes in the Father's house. How will you manifest yourself to us and not to the world? I'm looking at him. Guys, I am looking at Jesus right here, right now, in the hearts of the children of God. You are the manifestation of Jesus. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments, and my Father will love you, and me and my Father will come to you and make our home in you. Judas, you are the manifestation of Jesus. Peter, look at Peter. Look at John. Look at Matthew. We are the manifestation of Jesus. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. I'm going to stretch your thinking a bit here, because we got to talk about commandments. The word keep, it's easy to just translate it to obey, because you see here the word commandments and you want to just slap in the word, you will obey my commandments. And the word keep it's a little bit richer than that. John 17, verse 10 gives you a picture of this. It may not be verse 10. Verse 12. Jesus says, as he's talking to his Father, while I was with them, I kept them in your name, which you have given me. I have guarded them, and not one of them has been lost, except the son of destruction. Jesus makes it very clear, if you love him, you will keep his commandments. You will preserve his commandments. You will guard his commandments. That's what this Greek word means. Now, the word obey is also an alteration of the word, and it can be assumed that we will be obeying and following the footsteps of Jesus. But better defined is to guard and protect the commandments within you. What are the commandments? What are the commandments? So if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Back up to verse 34 of John chapter 13. So John has already revealed, the command to believe in him. And I believe with everything I am that if you love Jesus, you will preserve your faith. Your faith will be preserved. But here it is. It's spelled out black and white. A new commandment I give to you, Jesus says to his disciples maybe 5 minutes before, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. And so we bring this all back to loving one another. What was Judas's question? How will you manifest yourself to us? Judas, through you. And so when you love one another, you're not just loving one another. You're loving Jesus. This is the question that threw me for a loop this morning. Does the Old Testament ever say love one another? Well, it does in one place, Leviticus. Leviticus. Just take my word for it. It's in Leviticus. And it says, do not begrudge your neighbor, but love them as yourself. And then the New Testament, comes to life with this phrase. The New Testament quotes that phrase 8 times. And then, not even counting the parables and the other references as to loving one another, loving even your enemy. And the point here is that loving each other is loving God, is loving Jesus. If you love me, you will keep my commandment. The new commandment is to love one another. If you love me, you will love one another. You see, they're inseparable. They're inseparable because of the love which has been instilled in you by God the Father, who lives inside of you. If you struggle with loving people, go back to the beginning. God valued you even when you gave him no value. He loved you even when you did not love him. And let that work itself over in your heart. This is the love we give one another. We give back to God by giving to one another. We love them even when they don't love us. We value them even when they take value from us. I'm going to seem to take a pretty hard turn here. We'll call this part 2 of the sermon, if you like. Deuteronomy chapter 5. The question I had was, well, does this Old Testament say, love one another? I mean, it's implied in all the commandments that are laid out. So, I want to draw a connection to your mind. Jesus is talking to his disciples at the Last Supper. He's getting ready to leave them. Right? I mean, he'll come back in his new, in his redeemed flesh form after ascending to God, and he'll instruct them a little bit more. But this is his final message before he leaves them. The book of Deuteronomy is Moses' final message to Israel. And if you read through the book of Deuteronomy, you see Jesus' conversation to his disciples, especially what we're pulling out in these verses, is what Moses is telling the Israelites. He's telling them the exact same thing. Let me point this out in several spots. We go to the second commandment, Deuteronomy 5. I'll start at verse 9. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation, to those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 5. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Deuteronomy 10, verse 12. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? But to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Verse 15. Yet the Lord set his heart and love on your fathers and chose their offspring after them, you above all peoples. So that verse is very interesting, because I told you that God loved you before you loved him. That has always been the case, even in the Old Testament, that God loved the fathers of the Israelites and their offspring to come before they would ever love God. So this isn't a new paradigm set up in the New Testament. This is God. He does not change. And so the Israelites' response to loving God is out of a response of being loved themselves. Deuteronomy 11, verse 13. And if you will indeed obey my commandments that I command you today, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. I mean, he summarizes the commandments: to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. Verse 22 of chapter 11. For if you will be careful to do all the commandment that I command you to do, loving the Lord your God, walking in all his ways and holding fast to him. Jesus simply tells his disciples what Moses told the Israelites on his way out. Love me, keep my commandments. But Jesus says to his disciples, a new commandment I give to you, to love one another. Now, you got to ask yourself the question, how is that new? How is that new? If you look at the Old Testament and all the passages we just read, the commandment was to love the Lord your God with all of your might. It's so easy to get so confused with all the laws laid out in the Old Testament. I'll try to make this simple for you. The ceremonial laws, those that are like, you know, if you got boils on you and they're busting out, you know, you're unclean. If you got leprosy, you're unclean. Don't touch a dead body, you'll be unclean. Bring a sacrifice to me in my presence. I think there's even one like, don't drop your waste in the middle of the camp. Go outside of camp and do it. If you've got mildew on your clothes, mold on your clothes, you know, wash them, clean them, burn them. If it's in your house, tear down your house. You got all these cleanliness laws because God lived in a tabernacle and a temple in their midst. He was a clean God. And for him to live in the midst, he laid out a law of cleanliness. You want to approach me, here's what you need to look like. Don't come filthy. He does not live in a temple or tabernacle anymore. His home is here. So the ceremonial laws that applied when God lived amongst his people, not in their hearts, in their presence, they were applicable for their time and no longer applicable for today. That law has been fulfilled by Jesus Christ within you. No need to carry on the ceremonial laws anymore. He's here. Jesus has cleaned you up. You're good. You've got a second set of laws and commandments. Call them the 10 Commandments, and there are some similar that branch off those. And Jesus says, I give you a new commandment to love one another. Why is it a new commandment? Because the Old Testament and the Old Commandment was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. The new commandment is much like it, to love each other. Because the answer to Judas is when you love each other, you're loving God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, because God is manifested inside of you. That is the new commandment. You no longer love God disassociated from people. Loving God is loving your neighbor, loving each other. Because God's home is in you. To not love one another. And what does James say? It was 1 John 4. How can you say I love God and then with your same lips go and tear down your brother? In other words, that's impossible. Because the lips and the heart that love God loves God inside of people. Once again, if you struggle with loving people, you got to go back to the basic. God's love for you based upon who he is. And this builds up in you, in which overflows to love him in return by loving other people. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. If you love me, you will love me. If you love me, you will love other people. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. So, there is a danger here of simplifying this in the sense of just love one another. Just love, and that's all we need. The 10 Commandments, I have wrestled to find their place in today's post-resurrection Christianity. Right? Because God fulfilled the righteous requirements of the 10 Commandments through his Son. So it's as if I fulfilled them. I've gone so far as to believe if I put the 10 Commandments on the wall, Paul says I could be tempting myself because the law causes me to be tempted. And I read through the 10 Commandments several times this morning, and something stood out to me. It seems as if God gave Moses the defense system for me to live by, to protect those commandments, to love him and love one another. Deuteronomy 5, verse 7. You shall have, listen to the first and the last commandment. I'm going to read them through all the way. You shall have no other gods before me. Do not put anything before me that would be of more value than I am to you, because it will take your love from me. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Love me, worship me, and only me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is on earth beneath, or that is in the water under earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Don't be tempted to whittle out in wood or shape with stone or precious metals an image that you think will behold God's glory. Don't be you will want to see God. You will want to confirm your faith through your eyes. Don't do it. It will to not love me. It will tempt you to misdirect your worship. Have faith in me. And what Moses tells the Israelites, you've seen the wonderful works of God. Trust what you have seen. You haven't, but you have ears, and you have heard of the incredible works of God. Believe what you have heard. You do not need this in man-made form. You do not need to put God in a man-made form and to worship him to satisfy that desire. It is very dangerous. In fact, God says those who do it hate him. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. The Lord's name is authority. It is power. And to walk around and to say, well, by the name of God, I promise to do this, or to use God's name for any selfish means other than the authority that belongs to God is dangerous. Don't do it. Don't do it. God's name should be honored and respected. Now God, Yahweh, tells Moses, and he begins to shift this a little bit, to people around him, observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. You or your sons or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your ox, your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Take a break, because those people who are exhausted and always give themselves to work will fall away from God. Their love will be given to something else. God says you need a break. You need a break to remember me. And not just you. Love those who work for you and give them a day off. Love them by giving them a day off without jeopardizing their jobs, because they need a chance to remember me. And you know, if you're absorbed in your work, you're absorbed in your work. Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God commanded you, that your days may be long, that it may go well with you in the land that your Lord God is giving you. Honor, love your parents. Honor, give them the respect that is due to them, because God has placed them in authority in your life. Honor them, not because they honor you, but because God has commanded you to love them. You shall not murder. That word murder is not simply I'm going to go kill this person, but it's also the negligence and taking someone's life just even by accident. The thing that keeps popping in my head, texting and driving. I ought to be aware of your life when you are in my proximity. And I should live my life as if I'm protecting your life all the time. I should never do anything that is careless to your life because I love you. Because the love I have for you comes from within, because it comes from God. And so therefore I watch my step. I watch my hands. I watch my driving techniques. I watch what I do when I'm around you, because I care about you and love you. I shall not murder. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. In other words, don't take your neighbor's spouse from them, because your neighbor is more important, is more valuable. Your love for your neighbor should be more than your passion and desire and lust for their spouse. Don't steal. Don't take their stuff, because when you take their stuff, you say their stuff is more valuable than they are. Don't lie about them. Don't put them in a position because you lied about them that harms them. Don't bear false witness against your neighbor. Live in the truth. There's a good principle in general life. Live in the truth and follow the truth, especially when it has to do with your neighbor and loving them. And you shall not covet your neighbor's house, his field, his male servant, his female servant, his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. If you covet anything that belongs to your neighbor, then you don't covet your neighbor. What's the first commandment? Have no other gods before me. What's the last commandment? You begin to see the new commandment built in. Love nothing other than your neighbor. The new commandment I give to you, to love one another as I have loved you, Jesus told his disciples. Shortly later, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. My commandments are to love. My new commandment is to love one another because I am found in one another. You don't love one another because you have pity on them. You love them because they are valuable to God. You love them because God is found in them. Hey, and those who don't even belong to God still bear the image and likeness of God himself. And they are still valuable in that sense. How much more? People in this room. Your family right here. Now we begin to open the doors to the talks of oneness and unity. When we root it in the fact that God is one with us and that God has valued us based upon who he is. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever, even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it sees him nor knows him. You know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Yet a little while, and the world will see me no more. But you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. And that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. Whoever has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him. Judas, not Iscariot, said to him, Lord, how is it that you will manifest yourself to us and not the world? Jesus answered him, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. My Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. Whoever does not love me does not keep my word. And the word that you hear is not mine, but the Father who sent me. I'll close with this. Where I started. If you struggle with loving one another, go back. Go back to the elementary gospel that you were taught. God loves you because he is loved. Period. Everything else will flow from that. And you may say to you, I'll still struggle with this person or that person. But just do your best to live at peace with these people. Maybe loving them is separating yourself from them. Maybe building value in them is removing yourself from them, knowing your weakness. But you will keep his commandments, because his commandments are to love him, to love one another, because he loves you. And it's interesting, when you walk in love for one another, when you determine as a human to walk in love for one another, you begin to experience a fuller depths of God's love for you. Keeping his commandments is not a passive thing. It is an active thing on our part. We love one another because he's asked us to. He's told us to. And that is who we are. That's our new nature, our new being. Because you've been loved. And it has nothing to do with getting value from people. Remember this. That's how the world does it. It's not because they've put value in you that you love them. You're not returning a favor. You're giving them God. And the whole world will know that you're his disciples. They may not see him. They may not know him. But they'll know something's different.